The word agent is everywhere right now. People are always talking about having their agents read their email for them, or order their groceries, or build billion-dollar companies. Today, I'm going to show you what an agent actually is. We're going to take a look at one, describe all of its parts, and then build one from scratch. A viewer requested this video, and I think it's a great idea because I think agent is one of those words that makes this whole space feel a lot more intimidating than it needs to be. One quick note before we dive in. I am going to be talking about Claude Code agents today. There are some differences between agents across different tools, but some of the general data will translate across different coding tools. So, what is an agent? The simplest way I can put it is that an agent is an AI that has instructions and tools, and that's it. The instructions will tell it what to do and how to behave. The tools will give it access, read, write, run code, that kind of thing. It'll use the tools and instructions to complete the task that it's been given. And of course, you're already using agents. If you use Claude, that's an agent. Anthropic gave Claude its tools, web search and file uploads, and a big AI model behind the scenes to use. ChatGPT, same thing. Gemini, same thing. They're all agents. But the difference is those are all general purpose agents. They're designed to be good at a lot of different things. When you build your own agent, you're creating a specialist. You get to decide what the agent does and what tools it has access to. You are the one that decides this agent is good at this one thing. So let's take a look at what an agent actually looks like under the hood. With all the hype around agents, you might expect that building one would be a big tangled mess of code and files, right? But it really isn't. This is a Claude Code agent. It's a single markdown file that lives inside of a specific directory. This particular one isn't even very long. That's it. That's the entire agent. First, it's got a name. This is just the name that you use when you want to call your agent explicitly. There's a couple rules. You can only use lowercase and hyphens to name it. Next, there's the description. This is like the job posting, the description of what this agent should do. This actually matters quite a bit because it's what Claude will use to call this agent if it needs to trigger it automatically. We'll come back to that more in a little bit. Next are the tools. This just tells the system which tools the agent is allowed to use. You can set them explicitly here. There's also a disallowed tools option that you can use if you'd rather go that route and just mention which tools can't be used. If you leave this completely empty, your agent will inherit whatever tool set the calling agent has. So if Claude Code is calling this agent, it's probably got access to all of the tools. So this agent would inherit everything. And then after the tools, you can optionally specify what model you want the agent to use. If you put a model in here, the agent will always use that model by default. If you leave it blank, it'll use whatever model Claude Code is currently using when this agent is called. And then this next section is the prompt. This is explaining to the agent who he is and what his job is. So this particular agent I built for a previous project where I needed a brainstorming agent. So this basically says you are a product design brainstorming partner. Your job is to help the user think through what they want to build before any code gets written. And then you get to put in as much information as you want here. How you work, what the tasks are, what the role of this agent is. And then almost as importantly, in here there's a section on what you don't do. For this one, because it's a brainstorming agent, we didn't want it to write any code. We didn't want it to produce a big feature list. We didn't want it to just say yes to everything. Because it's brainstorming, that can have a tendency to become over-indexed on, yeah, that's a great idea, keep going. I wanted it to push back a little bit on things that didn't make sense, if they didn't make sense. And then I gave it an output format. I wanted it at the end to create a summary of the conversation that we'd had and then write it all to a file. I wanted that file to be able to be handed off to another tool to do the coding. So this agent didn't need to concern himself with actually coding. This was just the brainstorming partner that I was looking for. But really the main thing that I want you to take away from this is just a markdown file. Everything in here is written in plain English. There is no code in here. This is literally words you would say to a colleague when you're describing a role to them. Start by understanding the problem. Ask clarifying questions. Push back on scope creep. Don't write code. Here's the expected output format. And then at the end, there's a little bit about tone. Conversational, collaborative, like a smart friend who's helped ship a few things and knows the right question to ask. This is your chance to tell it to talk like a pirate if you want. This is really open-ended and it's all just natural language. If you can describe clearly enough what it is you're looking for, you can build an agent. All right, so let's do that. Let's go build one. All right, so here's my use case. I work on a lot of different kinds of projects. It might be an application I'm building, might be a video that I'm trying to do, but all of them start the same way. I come into Claude Code and I open up just a simple Markdown document and I kind of dump a stream of consciousness into it. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Here's the app I want to build. Here's the reason I want to build it. There's a video I'm working on. Here's the direction I think I want to take. Here's some notes I have on it. But no matter what the project is, I almost always end up with a list of questions that I need researched. Questions that I need to fact check maybe, or things that I want to verify to make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing on a video or building the wrong thing in an application. So I want an agent that can go do that research for me. All right, so I'm going to drop down to Claude in the terminal for this, because Claude gives us this nice little agents/command. This is how you create a new agent in Claude Code. And it'll give you two options. You can create a project level agent or a personal level agent. The project level will just live inside of this project. You can check in the file into Git and share it among your team members if you're working on a shared project. If you put it at the personal level, that's like the global level, that lives at a higher level and you'll have access to that agent across all of your projects. So I'm going to do just a project level for now. The recommended way is to generate with Claude. So of course I'm going to do that because why wouldn't I? So here's where we're going to describe what this agent should do and when it should be used. The more descriptive you can be here, the better the agent is going to work going forward. So this is where, once again, I recommend grabbing your favorite speech-to-text tool and just talking and letting Claude know what you need. So I need an agent that will do research based on a given file, sometimes technical questions, sometimes general questions. So I need you to go to valid sources and verify if you can across a couple of sources, Claude Code documentation or Codex documentation sometimes links to the source of the information that you found. If you can't find information, that's okay. Just say you couldn't verify something. All right, so I threw all of that in there. So then it's going to take a minute and generate an agent based on the description I gave it. And you can see I did not do anything fancy there. Stumbling, bumbling, it's okay. Claude will take what your intent is out of that and come up with something good. So the next step is where you get to select the tools that you want the agent to have access to. In this case, it definitely needs to be able to read and write. It doesn't necessarily need to execute anything, so I'm going to turn that off. Other tools, in this case, that's probably going to include web search, so I'm going to leave that on. And then you have the option of giving it a specific model. If there's nothing written down in that front matter, in that top section, if the model isn't specified, it'll just inherit from Claude Code whatever model was already being used. And very often for my agents, that's okay. But in this case, I'm going to tell it to use Sonnet because I know this is just doing simple web searches and summarizations, and I don't need the overkill and the heavy token usage of an Opus model. I can definitely get away with Sonnet and save some tokens. If you've been running into token problems, this is definitely a potential avenue of cost savings. And then just for fun, you get to give your agent a color. That's how you know it's running when it pops up in the middle of your code. And then this is something I haven't used in the past. You get a chance to configure the agent memory. This is interesting. I haven't played around with this a whole lot, but I do like the idea that they're trying to create this system of memory. So if you're going into the same project over and over, it's going to start building up a memory for you. So in this case, I'm going to go with the recommendation of just keeping it at the project scope. And that is it. Now, I was playing around with this a little bit earlier, and anytime you add memory in, it does give you this warning that the system prompt is very long. And that's because there is a ton of that memory information that they add to the bottom of a file. If you know that's not something you need, I would probably recommend saying no memory going forward, but they are defaulting it to project level. So I'm going to go ahead and just go with their default recommendation and just see what that does for me. All right, so here you're going to hit Enter or S to save, and then Escape to get out of there. And you now have a brand new fact checker agent. In order to use this agent, you actually need to exit out of Claude and come back in, or you need to call that agent by name explicitly. All right, so where do these agents live? They live in the .claude/agents folder. Because we created our agent in this case at the project level, we can actually see it right here. .claude agents, there is the fact checker markdown file. All right, so let's take a look at this fact checker. All right, so you can see here, this is what Claude did with all that information that I threw at it. It created a very verbose agent. It's calling it fact checker. The description: use this agent when there's a research questions file or list of facts that needs to be verified before being included in a video script. It then goes on to give what looks like a ton of examples, and this is to tell Claude Code when this agent might be used if it's going to auto trigger. So I'll talk about how you trigger an agent in a minute, but all of this information goes into causing it to automatically be used under certain circumstances. Here's all the tools that I apparently gave it access to. It is using the Sonnet model, has project memory, and it's yellow. But at its heart, here's the description. You're an expert research fact checker for a YouTube channel covering AI tools, workflows, and practical applications. Accuracy and honesty are your highest values. Here's the type of documentation you should use: official when possible, reputable tech publications, developer community sources. Remember, I didn't specify almost any of these. It is smart enough to know who's reputable and to put those in by name. Don't guess or fabricate. If information is likely outdated or changing rapidly, flag it. That's a really good one. And then finally, provide a summary, add any context, and then there's a bunch of stuff at the bottom about the agent memory. And it does look like it's the kind of thing you really might want going forward if you're working on a large project, that you want to build that kind of institutional memory over time, so it's not going to have to reinvent the wheel every single time. I will say this does add quite a bit onto what otherwise could be a very simple agent file. So the Claude Code documentation does go into not only the memory settings, but all of those individual pieces in really nice detail. They give some good examples, so I'll link that in the description as well. All right, so we just went through all that work of building an agent, which really wasn't all that much work. It was just a lot of me talking. Let's use this thing. There are multiple ways to call the agent. The first one is if you're doing anything where Claude Code finds a situation that matches the description in this agent, it'll just automatically call it. But in this case, we want to call it explicitly. So there's a couple of ways to do that. You can either just mention its name in something you're asking Claude. So I could say, ooh, use the fact checker agent to check the facts in the research questions file. But you can also call it explicitly using the @ symbol and then give it the name of your agent. And in this case, I'm going to tell it to write a summary of the results to a file called demo research answers. The agent knows exactly what to do because it's got all the instructions inside of it. And now it's off and running. It's going to search the internet for answers to all the questions I have in there. So we'll be back when it comes back. All right, and we're back. The research is complete, so let's take a look. All right, so I got a nice clear document with the answers to the questions that I had, the information that I needed, and a couple of fact checks that I needed. In fact, this is so valuable. I actually ran a different version of this agent in pre-video testing, and it reminded me of something that I had forgotten. I had been thinking that agent files were like skill files, and once I had created one, I could just distribute them amongst different coding agents, but you cannot do that. I had forgotten. Codex actually uses a different file type for their agents, and a couple of different coding tools have different directory structures. However, they are all basically variations of this format. So it's also mentioning the various ways that you can call the agent. There is a fourth option, and that is to run the agent as your entire session. So to do this, when you're starting Claude Code in the terminal, you use the -- agent option. So if I wanted to run a Claude Code session as that agent, I would just type Claude -- agent and then the name of the agent. In this case, it's fact checker. And then when I started that up, my entire Claude Code session would be that agent. It wouldn't be Claude Code. And you can see that it'll spell it out right here in your session. So why might you want to do that? I actually just did an entire video about that because I came across it from a post from Boris Cherny on X, and I wanted to test it out for myself. I was so surprised at the behavior that I had to do an entire video about it. So if you're interested in that, I'll put a link to that video in the description below as well, because it is definitely worth playing with. So that's it. That's all an agent is. It is just a simple markdown file with description, tools, and instructions. If you can describe what you want clearly enough, you can build one. Or really, you can have Claude build you one. My advice is to start with something simple and useful. Maybe a research assistant, maybe a brainstorming partner, maybe a code reviewer. Just go into Claude, type the /agents command, and give it a description of something you'd like it to do. Just go create a little specialist for your own project and play around with it. And then once you start to have a few agents that you like, you can have them actually work together as a team. Agent teams is another thing that we're not going to talk about in this video. I do have another video about that in the Opus 4.6 video, but there's also really good documentation in Claude Code about using agent teams. All right, if you build an agent, I would love to hear about what your agent does. Drop me a note in the comments below. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.